In this video I'm going to be looking at the undefined index error and how we can resolve this. Now take this following form as an example. I've just essentially created it. You should be familiar with this type of code, assuming you're getting this kind of error. All we're doing is we're posting the data back to this index.php page. I've left form action blank, and we have a form field here which is type text with the name something, so we can use PHP to grab that value, and then we have a submit button. So in the browser this is what it would look like. We would essentially type something into here and click submit, and that would post that data back to that page because we have our method set as post. Now let's say we wanted to echo out this value just up here. We could of course just say echo $_post, and then in square brackets we can access the variable that we want to retrieve from this form, and in this case it's the variable named something. So let's go over to our browser and just take a look at what happens here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type Alex and click submit. It works. However, this is because this post variable that we've created here, or accessed here, called something, actually contains a value. Now what happens if we just go onto the page as we saw before, but this doesn't contain a value? So I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. Now you can see that we've got a notice here, which isn't strictly an error. It's not like a parse error or anything, but we do have a notice here that can be quite ugly to users. So we've got notice undefined index something. So something is obviously the variable name that we're attempting to access, but because this value here is not actually defined, and by defined I mean that this form hasn't yet been submitted, we're assuming that this value already exists. Now because the value doesn't exist already, this means that we have this error thrown back at us. So what we need to do is we need to incorporate a way of checking if this value actually exists before we start to echo it out to the user. So what we're going to go ahead and do is get rid of that line entirely, and we're going to start fresh, but we're going to use an if statement this time. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the isSet functionality that PHP provides. So I'm going to create an if statement here, just outline that. And inside here I'm going to use isSet, which takes an array of values, so we don't need to use this twice, and I'll explain about that in just a moment, or more than once. We essentially then inside of this put $_post something as we did before. So now that we've done this, we've actually checked for this specific value being set inside of our form, because isSet will return true if this value has been set, or false if it hasn't. So we could include equals true at the end of this, but it's not entirely necessary. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and echo out $_post and then something inside of there. So what's going to happen now is when we initially run this script, it's first of all going to check whether this value has been set, which if we're just landing onto index.php it wouldn't have been set, so therefore this line won't run. We'll display the form regardless, but at least this check is in place now. So now what I'm going to do is just refresh the page, and you can see that the error has disappeared. Now when we go ahead and type something into this box and click submit, we have the value returned to us, and that's because this value has now been set and then we're doing something with it. So if you're creating something like a registration page, you may obviously have multiple form fields, and you'll also want to, well, you might want to assign these values to, or these post variables to variables inside PHP. So to do that, obviously the first thing we would do is say something equals $_post and then something, and therefore now this something variable here contains the value that we typed into the form. Now if we were to go ahead and duplicate this form field and say something _else, we now have two different form fields, and what we might want to do is check that both of these are set. So inside isSet, I mentioned earlier that you don't need to use this twice or more than once. You can actually use comma separated values inside. So we can then say comma $_post, and then we can specify the name of the other form field that we want to check. and then inside of here we could say something underscore else equals dollar underscore post, and then something else. Let's just tidy this up a bit in terms of tabbing. Okay, so now what we could go ahead and do is we could echo something, and then we could echo, say, a space, and then something else. And what we've done here is we've checked both of these values that they exist, and then we're reassigning them to variables inside of this if statement, and then we're echoing out. So this might be some kind of registration process, or you might just be taking text that you want to output back to the user. So I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the page. Notice that we don't have any errors. If we were to say omit this first one here, or this second one, sorry, here, you'll notice that we'll get an error for, let's just refresh. Oh no, we haven't. Oh, okay. The reason that we haven't in that case is because we're solely checking for something to exist, which it obviously doesn't. In this case, if I was to go ahead and just type something into here, and then something else into here, and click submit, they're both set, but if I was to go ahead and say Alex and click submit, it works again. Now this brings me on to an interesting point, because what we could actually do is we could just check dollar underscore post and see if that's set, and therefore both of these values would automatically be set because they're included in the form. So let's go ahead and try that out. Let's type in two fields here. You can see that that works. When we just refresh the page on its own, okay, so it hasn't worked. Oh, well of course that was my mistake. It wouldn't have worked because we're trying to access these variables here inside of this post, overall post array here. So what we would need to do is define each one. Now this can get quite lengthy, so there is another way around this, that we can actually check that this form's been submitted and these values exist. Now by exist, they might actually not contain a value, but you can use the empty functionality in PHP to check that as well. So inside is set up here, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change this to the value inside of my form. Now you can either use the submit button, but I prefer to use a hidden form field. So I'm going to go ahead in here and specify an input type of hidden. The name of this is going to be submitted, and the value of this is going to be true. Now that doesn't really matter what you put in there unless you're actually checking the literal value, but what we can now do is say if is set post, and inside of here we can say submitted. And what this will do is once the form has been submitted, if this value here is defined, which it will be because it's included in our markup, then these values are automatically there because we've actually submitted the form. So we've used a single post variable inside this post array to actually check, and we now know that the rest of the form fields, i.e. these two here, actually do exist. So let's go ahead and refresh now, and you'll see that the errors will disappear because we we're checking for this submitted hidden input field, or hidden field in our form. So here we can see it, just there. If I was to go ahead and then type in Alex but not another word here and click submit, it still works because the value is actually set, but it's not. It is empty. So inside of here you would then go ahead and check if this value or if both of these values are actually empty or not. So that's essentially how the undefined index error works and how you would resolve it.